So this is it. We're just doing a cold open. Didn't we set a precedent with all of our previous shows that we do something a little wacky, a little zany, a little fun? Come on, we're better than just doing a cold open. Writer's strike? Yeah. Okay, let's take it from the... Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Think Bigger. My name's Jason Stum, your host here on the show that inspires you to think beyond today and tomorrow to help you achieve your biggest ambitions. And while I'm happy to be back here on the set of Think Bigger, I'm a little bit jealous that I didn't get the chance to interview today's guest, and that is Kristi Hedges, the author of The Power of Presence. And Joe Chur was able to sit down with Kristi and conduct this interview, and Kristi's going to teach us all about working with others, leadership, neuroscience, and most importantly, how to think bigger. Let's check it out.
So I'm here with Kristi Hedges today, the author of The Power of Presence, and it's a book I've read and I really grew fond of. Explain to us what presence is.
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
So I define presence as the ability to connect with and inspire others. That's the definition I use in the book. I got there with the definition because I think we have sort of these grand notions of what presence is, right? It's almost like we think it's Hollywood stage presence or something that is only those people can have, right? The normal people can't have it. But when, and the research that I've done and all my work has told me is that there's a lot of different ways to have presence, and it really comes back to that connection.
So when we talk about presence, it can really apply to everyone, right? It's not necessarily professionals. It's just how you conduct your life and how you're perceived.
Yeah, I mean, that's the little secret of my book, right? We talk about it. It's a leadership book, and it's, as you know, filled with examples of how presence shows up in management and how it shows up with leaders in companies. And those are the clients that I have. But the reality is, like, whatever you learn from that, you can use it anywhere in your life. So you can bring presence to your family, you can bring presence to your friends, you can go away for the weekend with people you grew up with and approach it in a totally different way. And that strengthens relationships across the board.
So how did one, because there's a ton of people that write books and business books, but how did you become an expert in this art of presence?
Well, I don't think I'm an expert. Let me start there. So I would say that I'm an expert learner, right? So I pay attention and I'm really passionate about it. I can't remember a time when I didn't actually pay attention to presence. And so even as a kid growing up, I was an observer. So I would notice how people carried themselves or the energy they brought into a room and what that opened up for them or what it closed for them. I grew up in a small town where there are a lot of power dynamics, and those played out in terms of how people conducted themselves and what their presence looked like. So again, I just paid attention, and I went into politics early in my career, and I have not found, I'm sure there might be, but I've not found a profession where presence is talked about like it is in politics, right? We sit around a table like this and we do polling about the candidate's presence, and the Washington Post writes stories about the candidate's presence, and we all know what it is. It's all discussed. So it's even dissected in that environment. So you learn a lot about what actually creates presence and likability and builds trust. I didn't know that at the time, right? I thought I was just helping candidates to get elected. But I use those lessons a lot now. So, did a lot of other things in my career, started a firm in marketing and public relations, sold that and became a coach. But the common thread through all of that is really how do people connect with others.
That makes a lot of sense. So in the book, there's something that I believe you created, and it's called I Presence.
Yeah.
Can you take us through that? What is I Presence?
It's really the model that I use for presence, and it's sort of my take on presence based on, what I've seen, what I've observed, and what the research bears out. And there's 3 components to that. It's being intentional, it's building individual connections, and it's being inspirational. And really looking at yourself as somebody who could be inspirational as a default, not kind of every other Tuesday I'll be inspirational, but how can I show up in an inspirational way, more often with intention. So that's, and again, I came up with that because I was in so many conversations about, people would call me up and say, I have this leader and they're really great, but they lack presence. And I would say, well, what do you mean? And they couldn't really explain it. They'd say, well, presence, right? They just lack it. You know it, right? We see it. And if they couldn't explain it, of course, the leader didn't know what they were talking about. And so I thought, wow, there's so much confusion about this, and we're making it so hard how do I make it approachable for people? How do I make them feel like anybody can impact their presence, because they can, right? There's a lot of different ways to have it. So that's how the motto was born.
So what's the difference between leadership, like a good leadership, and good presence? Is there a difference there?
That's a great question. So I would say great leaders have great presence, and but that presence might look different. And what I try to do in the book, and I try to do in all my work, is to get people to expand their viewpoint of what presence looks like. Because often when we say, oh, that person has presence, we have what I'll call like capital P presence, right? They own the room, or they're very charismatic. But when I ask people who inspired them or had an influence in them and their life, they describe all kinds of different characteristics, right? They might say, well, they were kind of quiet but a great listener. Or they weren't necessarily charismatic, but man, they invested in me like nobody else, and I'm who I am today because of them. And so when you start thinking about it that way, and often I'll start workshops that way, is to have people just think expansively about who inspired them, and then go down and say, okay, what's presence look like? And they get it like that. It's not that I have to go out and be somebody I'm not. It's that I have to really hone in on the things about myself that really connect me to other people.
So speaking of people that inspire others, who inspires you?
A lot of people inspire me. So people always ask me, like, who do you think is an inspirational leader? And I could throw out big names, and I have a lot of people that I follow and that I enjoy listening to. But I'm going to purposely not give those names, because the people that really inspire me often are the leaders that I meet in my work, or the clients that I talk to, because they have this blend of what I'll call courageous authenticity. Right? They do big things, like, to this point, and they do it wholeheartedly, and people want to be around them because of that. And so you don't have to be a Howard Schultz, who I think is amazing.
You said the name.
I did. But you can be this person who's working in senior level management in a small company that people don't know about, but is creating great things. So I look at what do people do that really draws me to them. And draws other people to them, and that's why I like to pay attention to.
So in your book, you were talking about when someone's having a bad day, or just the notion that people need to smile more. In general, people aren't smiling enough. And I know for me personally that smiling comes in two ways. You're either happy and you're smiling, or things are so bad that you can do nothing but smile. And I know sometimes when, and it doesn't,
humor,
yeah,
right?
It doesn't often get that way, but once in a while, I would say a handful of times in the last year, like so many things happen, you're just like, oh, this is such a bad day, that you just start laughing, and it just seems better and okay. So why do you think people should smile more?
Yeah, it's like stress relief, right? It's just like, oh. Well, so, I would say that I have a prejudice that I think that we need more warmth and approachability in leadership. And one of the ways that we create that is just by smiling, right? When we look into a room, and, the research says that we categorize people as friend or foe when we first meet them. And how do people get into the friend category? They smile at us, right? They look like there's somebody we want to talk to. And we can see the difference between authentic smiling and inauthentic smiling. I took my kids to this museum in San Francisco a couple of summers ago, and they had these pictures up on the wall, and all you could just see is the top half, just the eyes, and you had to guess whether or not they were smiling, and then you could flip it down and see. And you could know from their eyes who was smiling, and then they also had what you could see if it was an authentic smile or a fake smile. And my kids went through and just nailed every single one of them. Not knowing any of the things that I know about, the research behind it was awesome to see. It just confirmed what we already know, is that when we see somebody who offers themselves like that to us, who has a warm smile on their face, then we want to listen to what they have to say. We're receptive to them.
But if someone is having a bad day and it's not you and it's someone else, how do you convince that person to say, hey, you know what, just try and smile and turn around? It seems like it's just really tough and easier said than done.
Yeah.
Essentially.
I don't know if you can, right? So I would argue that your job is to convince yourself, right, not to convince somebody else. So, a lot of times that has, a sort of circular effect. If you can find some laughter in a situation, it evokes that in somebody else. But with myself and with my clients, I worry more of or focus more on how do I get them to sort of reframe themselves so that they can, put a smile on their face when something's bad, or know that I'm somebody who doesn't smile that much, and also people don't come up to me that much. How might those two things be related, so that they can change their behavior a little bit and open up some opportunities?
No, that makes sense. So in your book, you also state that it's easier to form new connections in the brain versus changing old connections or habits, let's say.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that a little bit?
Isn't that crazy?
I found that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a crazy
And
concept.
probably why a lot of people don't stick to New Year's resolutions or anything that they want to change in their mind. It's almost easier to start a different path.
And we're awful at it, right? We just, that's why the gym industry exists as it does, because nobody keeps them. So I started getting really interested in neuroscience. It's been probably 10 years now, and looking at what makes people change, because I'm a coach, and so I'm all about helping people change. And neuroscience has found its way into all kinds of different domains, and we hear a lot about how it's attached to leadership, which I think is very exciting. And I'm a little bit of a junkie about it, so I'm always reading new studies and trying to apply it to my work and to myself. But what we know from neuroleadership and being able to really look at MRI scans is that when we have thoughts that we consistently think together, there's the deep grooves in the brain and our synapses, right? So it's how our brain craves efficiency. So we look for information that supports what we already think. It's actually easier to have a new insight because it's a new connection that has no groove. So when we're able to really have that time and that reflection time to kind of take a step back and look at something in a unique way and form a new thought, that's so much easier for us than trying to go back to the same thought we've had and disprove it. It happens, and it happens to people all the time, but it's easier to capture a new thought.
So you spoke a lot about neuroscience. The one, there's a lot of good things in the book, but the one really cool thing that stuck with me is the SCARF model.
Yeah, David Rock's model.
Yes. So I'd love for you to tell the audience about the SCARF model and how they can kind of use that in their daily lives.
Yeah, so David Rock he's a neuroleadership scholar, and he really coined the term neuroleadership and started a whole movement around that, and so really applying neuroscience into the leadership realm. He was kind enough to let me use the model for the book. And SCARF is really what so David's talked to all of these neuroscientists and worked with them for years to really understand how the brain functions and how that applies to the leadership realm. And in talking to, I think he said 30 some neuroscientists for this particular model, they developed what they call triggers. So what are the triggers that people typically react to that put us into fight or flight mode, that as Dan Goleman calls it, the amygdala hijack, that put us into a reactive mode that we don't want to be in. It's an emotional reaction, or sometimes an overreaction. And they found that humans have these 5 universal triggers, which is SCARF. So the first one is a trigger around status, so being made to feel less than. The second one's certainty, being not knowing what's going to happen, right? We all know what it feels like when things are uncertain. Autonomy is the next one, not feeling like we have room within sort of our world to navigate the way that we want. So it's why micromanaging feels so bad, for example. We feel like, here in my autonomy space. Relatedness, working with people and being around people that we know. If we don't know them, that creates a trigger for many people. And then fairness. And that's an easy one too, because we all know what happens if something goes at work, doesn't go our way, but we feel like we were treated unfairly. That really can make you have an emotional reaction. So what Rock did is he looked at these triggers and said, hey, not everybody has the same trigger all the time. So for some people, they get triggered more by certain things than others. Like for me personally, I've done a lot of stupid things because of threats to status and autonomy. Like I've been an entrepreneur since I was 27, so I've got some serious autonomy triggers. Like I do not like people in my space, because I've been doing it myself for so long, and I really enjoy that. So I, before I had this model, I would just react to that, right? I would push back on it. And so what Rock says is, hey, listen, we have these triggers. There's real power in knowing what your triggers are, because it gives you that moment of pause to say, this is just a trigger, right? I can choose to respond to it or not. I know it's my trigger. And then he also says, hey, you can use this with other people, right? Start noticing the triggers in people around you. And they're really exceedingly easy to notice if you just ask a couple questions. And then when you can talk to somebody's trigger, you get it. If you know someone's having a huge amygdala hijack over a certainty trigger, you can say, I sense that the uncertainty has got you rattled here. Right? And you've hit it because people will just kind of take a sigh of relief and just be like, yes, it's exactly what's going on. And it just opens up new conversations. So it's a really cool tool.
So an example of that in the workplace, if you were having a conversation with an employee, and instead of or an employer, instead of one of the things I liked about SCARF when I read it in the example is, instead of saying this is how you should do it better, you kind of reverse it and you ask the question to the person and say, maybe instead of, is this the best way you think you should do it? Is there a better way? And it kind of leaves that open. Instead of the attack position, you're just really trying to get their insight, and most of the time they'll answer their own question, and you effectively get the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, what he's saying is you can use good coaching questions to get underneath some of those triggers. So, when people have an emotional reaction, it's generally an overreaction, and it's not a logical reaction. So this at home, right? You can see it with your kids.
Oh, it never happens. I'm just kidding.
It never happens in my house either. Never. Actually, it's so funny because my daughter, who's 10, she's really interested in brain function. So she'll say to me, Mom, you're having a hijack right now, right? And
really?
she'll like take a deep breath, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, I am, right? So there's huge power, right, even for kids, and you're finding that a lot of what we're talking about here is being taught in schools now around mindfulness training for kids. So, but I digress. But yeah, knowing that what's going on underneath of someone, you're talking to them and asking some great questions helps them, what I'll call self-persuade, right? Just to get to their, everybody wants to be able to have the space to come up with their own insights, right? That's what makes us feel good. We get that own burst of, oh yeah, that's exactly what I should do, which feels so much better than somebody saying, hey, leave my office and go do these 5 things.
So it took 7 years of being married, so the last year I learned it because we're going on 8 years, to learn when my wife has a hijack mode, I don't react to it. I don't say anything. I just move out of the way and let her have it. And then, because if I would react during that time, it just doesn't do anything except make matters worse. So
yeah,
and I'm sure that's
good learning
common.
as a husband. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Which sometimes makes them mad too, right? Because they want the reaction.
Yeah, no, I just like, okay, I'm walking out of the room. But it took me a long time because I would react constantly to that. But that, just looking at that and how you talk to, people and how you handle someone's reaction to something, it's really interesting, and that model helps. So I encourage anyone to look at it, and if you don't want to read it in your book, which hopefully they do, there's a really good TED Talk on it too. So you can just Google SCARF model and TED, and I think it's 15 minutes long or something like that. Not long at all. Really
good downloads for papers and stuff. He's got a lot of stuff out there.
Exactly. So maybe we'll put that in the show notes too. So this show is about thinking bigger. And you obviously, you're an accomplished author. You sold one company, at least, right? It was just one company. Yeah. And you've done a lot of stuff in your life already. So I'd like you to boil down, since there's so much goodness in your book and things you could tell the audience to really help them, give us like 2 or 3 actionable tips for the viewers that they could take with them and maybe start at some point in the near future, if not tomorrow, for the betterment of their life.
Wow, yeah.
No pressure.
The betterment of their life.
No pressure.
Okay, so, well, first, and I say this in the book, but this has just been repeated to me over and over again, but the idea of intention is really, it's groundbreaking for many people. And I use intention all the time. I use it every single day. And it doesn't take a lot of time. Right? It's just being able to, in that moment, take a pause and really be mindful about how do I want to show up in this situation. And in the book, I talk about really understanding the emotional resonance you want to have. So instead of thinking, what do I want to say, thinking, how do I want people to feel as a result of this exchange that we're having? And if you can take that just a minute or 2 to think that, it changes the way that you show up. Because most of the time we don't show up that way. Right? We show up in our distracted busyness, and that's okay sometimes, but we miss a lot of opportunities that we could show up in a different way. So it doesn't take that long and changes things for people. So that's intention. The other one that I would say I hear a lot of feedback about is the idea of getting feedback on your presence. And I outline a really easy process in the book to do it, and I do it in workshops a lot, so I hear feedback on the spot there, because we generally don't ask people about this question. So it has this sort of overstated impact on our life, our presence. It determines like who our friends are, who we date, who marries us, who hires us, who promotes us. I mean, our presence just impacts everything, and most of us walk around not really having a great idea of what our presence actually is. Though everybody else knows it, right? We're so good at understanding people's presence. We size them up as soon as they come in our door. Like our detectors start going off, and we're like, oh, okay. It may take us a while, but we figure them out. But it's hard to figure ourselves out. Like, what is our leadership shadow? Like, what do people see when they see our presence? So just taking that time and asking a couple of very pointed questions of people who will be candid with us, it just changes the way you see yourself, and for good and also for constructive ways, and what we hope for is alignment, which is that we're showing up the way we want to show up. And if we don't know how we're showing up, it's really hard to know if we're hitting that target.
Yeah, I think I was telling you one of the coolest things that happened with our company last year, and initially the feedback was, it was hard to take, and this was this employee questionnaire last year, and when I received the results, it's like, because it's your business, you feel like you take it so personal, but then when you digest it and you're like, what are the employees trying to say here? I think that's really reflective in what you're saying, because ultimately you would hope, in our case, we took action steps to correct some of those. Some of them were very simple things that meant a lot of things to our team, but weren't necessarily on the priority list for us. And as you grow as a company, you start to learn those things, and because of our growth, we just didn't take time to ask our team, but when we did, I think it really just made a difference in the culture and how we communicate and the structure, and has taken us to a level of culture that we never even had before.
Yeah, well, it takes a little bit of courage, right, to have that kind of vulnerability, to ask those questions and to take that content in and really do something about it. And just asking people about your presence is the same thing, right? A lot of people are like, oh gosh, that sounds personal. I don't want to ask somebody that question. But when you hear the feedback, that's really what I do for my clients a lot of the times, right? I ask those questions for them, and so I'm able to say, here's what people think of your presence. And time and time again, people will say, I didn't realize I was doing that. Or people like it when I do that. I didn't know that resonated. They just don't know. And sometimes it's just the smallest things to change that make the biggest difference. We don't know. So having that data is really key.
Yeah, and then even again, just not realizing how a little thing impacts someone else and their perception of you, right? So yeah, I think that's invaluable. Is there any other tips that you like to leave? And those are two really good ones.
Yeah, those are, well, the other one is, I would say that there's just such a hunger in organizations for inspiring leadership, inspiring colleagues. It's, that's the third piece of the model, and it's ended up going to be the focus of my next book that I'm working on now, because, I just think we need more of it, right? It's, there's more information than there's ever been available to people. And even inside organizations, we give information out now like never used to happen, in companies. But information is not inspiration, it's not clarity, right? So we need people to step into that space and to help people see the way forward, because we're happiest in our organizations, we do the best work when we're all feeling a sense of purpose. And that comes from the leaders, at the start, and then hopefully, the leaders, no matter where they're sitting within the organization, and we can be a leader from wherever we are. And so helping people feel equipped to do that's really what I'm focused on now.
The importance of leadership to me is answering the why question. And when you may have a directive that possibly may not make sense to everyone in the organization, but if you can explain why it's important, I think they see it completely different, and it's more of they see it more of a selfless action versus, hey, he's doing this for himself or the betterment of certain people versus the whole organization. So I think just always getting to that why question. I know in our team meeting a few weeks ago, one of our account managers, we have this section in our meetings where they come up and they teach us something new, and account manager simply said, ask why 5 times to get to the root of a problem. Like, well, why is that a problem? Well, why is that a problem? And ultimately, you get to the real problem. But if you don't start asking the why question, then you may not ever get there.
So have you seen Start With Why? Have you?
Yeah.
So I think that's it's going back to the same piece of it. It's just like you said, it's like finding the purpose for people, being that kind of inspirational leader. I mean, look what you have here, right? You walk in and you see values here, and it's a very values-driven company, and you can tell what the vibe is like, that those values are alive and well within these walls. Not every place is like that, and I wish every place were like that. So, you know, part of my mission is to help people see like what their personal potential is to be able to create inspiring environments for the people around them, whether that's a company or, you know, whether it's a nonprofit or a group of people sitting around trying to do something big. Yeah, let's see.
Well, Kristi, it was great to have you on the show today. Again, the author of The Power of Presence. I highly recommend your book.
Thank you.
So again, thank you, and we're looking forward to your next book, and hopefully we can have you on the show again.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.